Weapons?
No weapons. There's no dishonor if you refuse to fight. You can leave unharmed right now.
Any rules?
One fight to survive.
Hello to all the classic people that are returning. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors. As a technical note, references and citations are listed for each show on the site at classicmovierev.com. Today on the Classic Movie Reviews podcast, we are taking on The Challenge 1982. Much like the Yakuza 1974, this is a hybrid between a martial arts movie and an American action film. What I think makes this movie stand out from the thousands of others is that the American boxer Rick does not become a champion martial arts fighter in a matter of weeks or months. One of the failings of the Karate Kid 1984 series, and I dearly love those movies, except for the last one, is that in less than 6 months, Daniel was able to compete against students that had been training for years. Even Rocky 1976 had decades of boxing when he faced Apollo Creed. This movie, which is well worth your time, is not well loved. It has a pitifully low 6.3 rating on imdb.com. It fares no better on RottenTomatoes.com with 50% on the tomato meter and only 70% audience approval. New York Times film critic Janet Maslin said in an extremely negative review on July 7, 1982, quote, "Scenery and sadism are the main things on display in John Frankenheimer's The Challenge, a hard-boiled action film with great hopes of becoming something more. The setting is modern urban Japan, presented with a fair amount of realism and detail," unquote. And she later continued, quote, "Without Mr. Mifune, The Challenge would certainly have a lot less weight. His presence helps add seriousness to the proceedings, especially in the final sequence that shows him roaming through the executive headquarters in warrior's garb, preparing to use his sword against the machine guns of a modern-day security police squad. Mr. Mifune is impressive even in a sequence that has him coolly serving Mr. Glenn live fish and newly slaughtered fresh lobster for dinner. The lobster has not stopped moving. As part of his real man training, Mr. Glenn obligingly wolfs it down," unquote. Iron Fist at ultimateactionmovies.com is much kinder, saying, quote, "With The Challenge, we are gifted with a true samurai movie geared towards American audiences and our attention span. It serves as a travel log of Japan, as well as an introduction to Bushido and the ancient art of the samurai. This is a truly important movie that is only masquerading as an action film. Dare we call it art?" Unquote. Scott Glenn and Toshirô Mifune make a pretty tough team. I would put this movie in with other duo action films such as Mifune working with Charles Bronson in Red Son 1971, and Mifune vs. Lee Marvin in Hell in the Pacific 1968. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Scott Glenn played American pug boxer Rick. Glenn was born in Pittsburgh in 1941. He eventually attended William and Mary College before joining the Marine Corps. He intended to become a writer and worked as a reporter for almost half a year. He began to take acting lessons to help his writing dialogue. In 1966, he traveled to New York, where he studied with George Morrison and later at the Actors Studio. He began to receive stage and television work. His first movie was The Baby Maker 1970, but I first remember him from the excellent television movie Gargoyles 1972. A great tough guy, he was in Angels Hard as They Come 1971, Nashville 1975, Fighting Mad 1976, and Apocalypse Now 1979. But it was Urban Cowboy 1980 that made him a star. He played a totally believable woman-hitting stinker that ran the mechanical bull at Gilley's following his release from prison. This movie may have also caused the collapse of the Soviet Union, but more about that at another time. Glenn started getting significant roles such as The Challenge 1982, a great martial arts movie where the Caucasian hero does not turn into a master in 2 weeks. Glenn and Mifune team up to fight the enemy at the end. One uses martial arts and the other modern weapons. Other films include The Right Stuff 1983, where he is most excellent. Also dramas Countdown to Looking Glass 1984 and The River 1984, and another starring performance in the updated Western Silverado 1985, The 1990s on were just as good with The Hunt for Red October 1990, Backdraft 1991, Silence of the Lamb 1991, Courage Under Fire 1996, Absolute Power 1997, Training Day 2001, The Bourne Ultimatum 2007, W 2008, Secretariat 2010, Sucker Punch 2011, and The Bourne Legacy 2012. Glenn continues to work. Toshirô Mifune was pretty darn good as traditional samurai Yoshida. Interestingly, this great Japanese actor was born in China to a Japanese family. Born in 1920, he did not travel to Japan until he was drafted in the Japanese military at the age of 21. During the war, he served in an aerial photography unit. Following the war in 1947, he tested for and got his first film role in These Foolish Times 1947. At some point, he met and befriended exemplary director Akira Kurosawa. Drunken Angel 1948 was the first of 16 collaborations between the pair, resulting in some of the best movies ever filmed. Mifune's films include Stray Dog 1949, Rashomon 1950, which added to English the Rashomon effect, which is, quote, a term related to notoriously unreliability of witnesses, unquote. The absolutely amazing Seven Samurais 1954, which was the basis for the Magnificent Seven 1960, and maybe that waste of celluloid The Magnificent Seven 2016. The visually stunning Throne of Blood 1957, based on Shakespeare's Macbeth, The Hidden Fortress 1958, Yojimbo 1961, Sanjuro 1962, High and Low 1963, and Redbeard 1965, a brilliant film where Mifune plays a mentoring doctor. Mifune took roles in Grand Prix 1966, Hell in the Pacific 1968, which could be the most macho film ever, Red Sun 1971, which should have been the most macho film ever, political thriller Paper Tiger 1975, Midway 1976, where he was outstanding as Admiral Yamamoto. Oddly, he was in the comedy 1941, which came out in 1979. The television miniseries Shogun 1980 as Lord Toranaga made him very popular in America. The Challenge 1982. And finally, Deep River 1995. During the same period, he made dozens of Japanese movies. Mifune died in 1997 in Japan. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
As the credits roll, an old Japanese man is shown in a traditional dojo examining a pair of samurai swords. The year is 1945 and the location is Japan. He takes the sword outside to a group that is sitting in a semicircle on the ground. A young boy with glasses is called forward. The boy acknowledges Yoshida, Toshirô Mifune, before accepting the sword from the older man. A man rushes forward, grabs the swords, and while doing so, cuts the boy wearing the glasses. The scene switches to a boxing training gym in Los Angeles, California in 1982. Rick, Scott Glenn as a sparring partner, are basically a punching bag that moves. A Japanese man in a wheelchair, Toshirô, Saab Shimono, arrives with a helper, Akiko, Donaki Benz. They are there to meet the fighter that is wailing on Rick because he is planning on fighting in Tokyo the following week. The fighter continues to taunt Rick until Rick unloads on him and shows him the skills he has. Rick eventually knocks out the younger opponent, losing his job at the same time. Later at his dump apartment, Rick is visited by Toshirô and Akiko. Toshirô offers $500 a day to help them transport an important object back to Japan. Toshirô explains that it is the missing sword and it goes back to his father. They want Rick because he won the fight. Akiko keeps saying that Rick is not right for the job. Toshirô explains how the sword will be taken into Japan and where to go after it is dropped off. When Toshirô and Akiko leave, they are being watched by Ando, Calvin Young. Rick and Toshirô make the flight to Osaka. Rick clears customs with the sword, apparently in a bag of golf clubs. Akiko is watching him come through customs. A taxi picks up Rick, and a man with a gun jumps in with him. Ando gets in the front seat and tells Rick to stay calm. Toshirô and Akiko come out of the airport with no idea Rick has been kidnapped. Other men are watching them. Toshirô and Akiko leave in a handicapped van. Ando has Rick open the golf bag while another man keeps a gun pointed in his face. They find the sword, and Ando realizes that the sword Rick has is a decoy. He radios the other men to stop the van with Toshirô and Akiko. Akiko escapes, but the driver is killed defending Toshirô. Ando brings Rick to the van and throws him in with Toshirô. As they drive, Ando explains that he doesn't understand Japanese culture because Rick and Toshirô are about to die for an antique sword.
How do you like Japan so far? Believe me, I know how you feel. I come over here a couple times a year, and each time I understand less about these people. Let me give you an example. The two of you are about to die over a sword. A freaking antique sword. Him I understand. They're queer for swords over here. They figure you mess with somebody's blade, you're messing with his soul.
Ando says he works for Toshirô's uncle. He cuts up Toshirô while Rick is forced to watch. Finally, Toshirô says the sword came in on another flight. At last, Rick attacks Ando but is knocked back. Ando throws Toshirô in his wheelchair out the back of the moving van. Toshirô flies into a ditch and dies. Ando says he will take Rick to see his boss, Hideo, Atsuo Nakamura, and revenge will be taken out on him. They go to a building, and it is the same building that was used in the Yakuza 1974. It is the International Conference Hall in Kyoto, Japan. Ando gives out a lot of information about his boss during the walk.
What does he steal besides swords?
Mr. Hideo doesn't have to steal anything. He already owns everything. He's got shipping, real estate, racetracks. He's got hotels. He's even got a 5-story cat house in downtown Bangkok. The air you breathe, my friend. He's even got a piece of that.
Hideo has one sword in his office and a holder for a second. Hideo offers 4 times as much for the actual location of the sword. He says he was wounded during the battle for Okinawa and lost the sword to American medical staff. Both Hideo and his brother Yoshida have been looking for the sword for 40 years. Hideo stops to make a stock deal while he continues to threaten Rick with the sword. Rick tells Hideo that he knows nothing, and then Ando knocks him out. They take Rick away in a car. As they walk by, Akiko is hiding in the bushes. Rick is taken to a dark alley, but he makes a break and runs to a massive fish market. Rick fights off a knife with a metal basket. Before escaping across the railroad tracks, he is stabbed in the back. Rick sits down because he is weak from losing blood. A Hideo man finds him and is about to shoot him. Akiko stabs the man in the back, saving Rick. When he awakes, he is in the Yoshida compound and is being treated by Akiko, who is wearing a traditional outfit. He passes out again. Outside, it's a regular karate school, just like Hans Island in Enter the Dragon 1973, but this time for good. Rick tells Akiko that he wants to talk to her father, Yoshida. About this time, Go, Clyde Kusatsu, returns with Toshirô's wheelchair. The missing sword was hidden in the wheelchair the entire time. Yoshida takes the sword with reverence. Rick steps up and demands payment. He is rebuffed as Yoshida returns the sword to the dojo and prays over the ashes of Toshirô. Another sheath is waiting for the sword that Hideo has. I said karate a while back because it fit better, but they are doing kendo with wooden swords and practicing archery. So it is more of an all martial arts school. Rick watches the archery with great interest. In another courtyard, Go is practicing calligraphy. Go shows Rick that there are ninjas on the rooftops. Rick comes to a traditional dinner and gets sloppy drunk on sake with eels in it. It's like the worm in Mescal. If you drink enough, you'll fight for the worm. Rick manages to embarrass everyone before he runs out to puke. The next day, Rick is very hungover when the gong rings in the morning. Everyone else is already practicing karate. Rick mimics the movements. Yoshida sees him and says he stinks.
You stink.
Rick challenges him or anyone to a fight. They bring in Kobo, Kaioki Nagaya, to fight Rick.
You will fight Kubo. When it is over, we will give you your money and you can leave us.
Weapons?
No weapons. There's no dishonor if you refuse to fight. You can leave unharmed right now.
Any rules? One fight to survive.
Kobo mauls Rick as the whole clan watches. Rick is paid off and escorted off the compound. He and Akiko make puppy eyes at each other. Rick ends up drinking in a bar full of prostitutes. When he tries to leave, they try to charge him a cover. He refuses, and the manager tears up his bill. Ando is waiting for him.
Frank, come on over here. Have a seat. Sit down.
How you find me?
All the American wise guys in Kyoto end up in this bar sooner or later.
Ando explains that Rick needs to go back to Yoshida and ask to be a student. When he gets the chance, he should steal the sword and give it to Ando. He will be paid $15,000. Rick goes back to Yoshida and begs to become a student. Rick refuses to kneel, but he is accepted anyway. They go for a training session of cutting bamboo with swords. Yoshida does it easily, but Rick's sword bounces off. Later, he is sent to clean while others train. One day, he goes to kendo training and is roughed up by the instructor. He ends up facing Kubo and is beaten senseless. Later, Rick hears someone belittling a young boy that is training at the school. He gives the boy words of encouragement. Rick tells the boy that he has heard Sensei say that he will be a great warrior.
I know how you feel. You and me were in the same boat.
You don't know like boat.
Man, Rick know like boat. Chiro, how old are you?
7.
7, huh? You're gonna find out. There's a lot of things in this world a man has to do that he don't like. You want to be a warrior, don't you?
You don't know what you don't disgrace.
Hey, come on. What is this? Listen, I heard Sensei say that he thinks someday you're gonna be his best student. No kidding, I wouldn't lie to you. He says he knows a warrior when he sees one.
Akiko overhears the conversation. One night, Rick finds himself alone and goes to steal the sword. He makes his way out of the compound. He is scared by a cat and draws his sword out of instinct. He is overcome with a bout of conscience and heads back to the compound. Yoshida and Go are waiting for him as he returns. Yoshida says he knew Rick would take the sword. He utters a command and archers come out of the bushes. Rick bows and presents the sword to Yoshida and asks for forgiveness. Yoshida says he must prove himself. The next day, Rick digs a deep hole. They bury him up to his neck and leave him. Kobo places cooked rice out of his reach after the first night. On the second night, a rat comes and freaks Rick out. The young boy tries to give him water, but he refuses. The next night it rains. Rick eats a bug that comes around him. Finally, he sees Yoshida coming with a sword to kill him. It is a hallucination.
How long did you last, Sensei? 5 days.
They decide he has had enough and dig him out. Rick has been in the hole for 5 days, the same record as Yoshida. After he recovers, Rick goes back to training. This time he learns throwing stars. Rick is called to Yoshida and told that Yoshida has challenged Hideo to a duel. Each man will bring 4 followers. Yoshida asks Rick to be one of the men. Rick is honored, but Yoshida says he wants to show them what he has made of their thief. Yoshida and the 4 retainers wait in the bamboo forest. Hideo shows up and says he is not going to fight and demands the sword be given to him. Ando and other men get out of the second car. Rick puts a knife on Yoshida's throat and demands they come for the sword. Rick knifes the first guy. Yoshida and others kill 2 more. One of Yoshida's men is killed, but the rest get away amongst the gunfire. That night, Rick is pacing around, but he finally bursts into the dojo to talk to Yoshida. He says they need guns to fight men that won't follow the rules. At her father's instruction, Akiko tells the story of the night of Hideo stealing the sword and cutting Toshirô, forcing him to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Apparently, that wasn't bad enough. Hideo was already in the Japanese army. one of the soldiers shoots Yoshida's father, who lived long enough to curse Hideo. Yoshida explains to Rick why he cannot turn the sword over to such a bad man. Yoshida takes over Rick's training, and he vastly improves. Akiko explains to Rick that her father may want to will the swords to him like a son. I'll talk more about this in the conclusions. Go watches Rick become better and closer to Yoshida. One night, Rick is guarding the sword, and Go tells him that Akiko has left the compound. Kobo was guarding the gate, and he and Rick fight. Rick holds his own this time. Go reveals 2 gunmen in the cart, and they kill the 2 other guards. The small boy attacks Go as he tries to steal the sword. Go cracks the little boy in the head. Yoshida comes and kills both of the gunmen with his sword. He faces down and kills Go. Rick kills one more of the robbers. I'm officially stopping adding Wilhelm screams when a bad guy dies for the rest of this podcast. Maybe. Rick leaves and goes to drink in a hotel room. Akiko shows up in his room. She asks Rick to come back. They get all naked and stuff. Then they go on a sightseeing tour of the city. They end up at some kind of festival. Rick loses focus and misplaces Akiko. He looks for her, but instead finds Ando. Ando has a sniper on the roof. Rick takes the news back to Yoshida. Yoshida says he will fight, and Rick cannot help. Yoshida takes his traditional weapons and heads out, leaving all of his men behind. Hideo has Akiko at his super secure compound. Ando is there as well. Yoshida begins killing security guards. One guard sends an alarm and an army of guards run outside. Yoshida keeps killing guards with his bow and arrow and sword. After killing 7 or 8, he makes it into the building and kills the security cameras. Yoshida kills 2 more guards with throwing stars. Suddenly Rick shows up and picks up an M16 rifle. He mows down a crowd of guards that are about to get Yoshida. Yoshida signals Rick to follow. Rick is caught by a guard but is saved by Yoshida. Akiko is sent with Ando while Hideo changes into his fighting clothes. Rick and Yoshida continue to kill guards. Rick finally gets another gun. They ride the elevator up to Hideo's floor. Now he has armed himself with the other matched sword. Yoshida throws calthrops, anti-cavalry attacks, and Rick shoots a bunch more guards. Ando is holding a gun on Akiko, and Hideo last faces Yoshida and Rick. They talk smack to each other. Hideo calls off the guards. Yoshida and Hideo face off with the swords. I'm betting on the guy who trains every day, and not the businessman. The fight is pretty even until Ando shoots Yoshida in the back. Hideo chops off Ando's head for shooting his brother. Rick and Akiko run to Yoshida. Rick takes up the sword to fight Hideo. Rick adds in some boxing, but he has taken an awful beating. Well, really a cutting. Both men stab their swords into a chair and lose control of them. In a hand-to-hand fight, Rick does okay. They both get their swords back and continue the fight. Rick pulls a stapler off a desk and staples Hideo's forehead. He then cuts an electrical cord and burns Hideo's hand. In the end, Rick cleaves Hideo's head. Akiko has the M16, and the bloody Rick gives the 2 equal swords to Yoshida. The 3 kneel before the swords as the sun begins to rise. I'll be back with conclusions and the world-famous short summary following a word from our sponsors. Summary. I'm not much of a Speed Racer 1967 fan, but according to IMDb.com, the main character was named Go Mifune, and an M was put on the hood of the car as a tribute to Toshirô Mifune. Watching this movie and the way that it is cut has a few skips. At one point, Akiko tells Rick that her father may be giving the swords to him when he dies. There's no real explanation for why Go would betray the family after so many years. The plot points are cleared up a bit as the script was written to be a father finding his spiritual son. As filming began, most of the character scenes were cut or shortened. Again, according to IMDb.com, Glenn said Mifune told him, quote, "Look, this is what's happening. I'm disappointed, and I know you are, but this is what it is. So you can either have your heart broken every day, or you can use this experience as an opportunity to be spending an interesting time in Japan with me as your tour guide," unquote. And Glenn accepted the offer. World famous short summary: boy has trouble with new girlfriend's family. Hope you enjoyed today's show. You can find connections to social media and email at the site at classicmovierev.com or in the podcast show notes. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you've already subscribed, you can tell a friend, colleague, or family member about the show or leave a review at Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show get found. If you want to comment, suggest a movie, or help out, contact me by email at jec@classicmovierev.com. Beware the Moors.